Welcome to Windy Night Stories. Tonight's story is by Robert Blatchford. The Studio. No member of our family has ever doubted Uncle Dick's ghost story. In the first place, my uncle was not of an imaginative temperament. In the second place, he was an old soldier, and the veracity of old soldiers is proverbial. In the third place, when my uncle put his left hand upon his sword hip, drew up his 72 inches of bone and brawn to attention, and frowned, no one could be rude enough to call his good faith in question. Therefore, my uncle's story is true. But let me tell it, and judge for yourselves. My late uncle, Sergeant Richard Rogers, of the 6th Inniskilling Dragoons, had, at the time of which I write, retired to Stockport on a pension. The pension being small, and work but scarce, my uncle, who was a well-formed and stalwart man, eked out his modern resources by standing as a model for some of the local artists. Among his patrons was young Edward Marcher, and it was on the occasion of his first visit to that gifted artist's studio that my uncle met the ghost. Mr. Marcher had engaged a couple of rooms in an old mansion, number 30, in the marketplace. Artist-like, he was proud of the antiquity of this abode, and, as he ushered my uncle in, discoursed to him enthusiastically upon the beauty of the old oak staircase, with its quaintly designed and frankly carved balustrade and handrail. But my uncle was not aesthetic, and answered the young man's eulogies with a bluff, good old staircase, no doubt, but not made for tall hats. The handsome apartment used as a studio charmed him as little. He glanced carelessly at the oaken wainscot, heavily beamed ceiling, and somber tapestries, and began, without a word, to don the uniform of a Cromwellian Ironside. But the ancient broadsword roused his interest immediately. His dark eyes lighted up. A stern smile flickered round his close, thin lips. He drew the weapon with a swish, bent the blade on the floor, flashed it round his head in a couple of rapid circles, and said, as he curled his iron-gray mustache and shook his burly figure in his belts and buff jerkin, "Ah, a hefty tool, well-balanced, and long in the reach. A man might cut a throat with this and do himself credit." He returned the weapon to its sheath, and fell at once into the attitude required. Mr. Marcher began to sketch my uncle rapidly and boldly in charcoal. As he drew, he talked. And he talked of the old house, because he loved old houses as a China maniac loves blue china, and because my uncle's indifference had piqued him. "There must have been great comings and goings, and sayings and doings, in this old house," said the artist. "This part we are in now is the new wing, and was finished in 1618. It would be a bright modern room at the time of the Civil War." At the word war, my uncle pricked up his ears. The painter realized his advantage, and continued, "The Civil War was no affair of blank cartridge, Sergeant. Englishmen could fight in those days." "Great captain, Cromwell," said my uncle. "Look at the Battle of Preston. Boney himself never showed a better generalship." "Grand old times," said the artist, deftly sketching my uncle's eyes with the light in them. Said my uncle. "Don't know about that. Canary is a sweet, heady drink, and Sheriff's sack must have been treacly." "But the home-brewed, Sergeant?" suggested Marcher. "Ah," said my uncle, smacking his lips. "The home-brewed would be good, in a large pitcher." "This," said the artist, as he put in the dark shadows under the heavy mustache, "was the lady's boudoir. Should have tales to tell if walls could speak. In that corner is a sliding panel. It is nailed up now, as you see. There is a secret passage behind it, leading to the garden. It's been used, Sergeant, you may depend. Youth will have its fling," said my uncle. "There were some pretty women in those days," continued the painter. My uncle winked. "This was a royalist house," said Marcher. "Charles I has dined here. Charles II lay concealed here. Fairfax is said to have made it his headquarters. There'll be plenty of romance, and tragedy too, bound up with the history of this place. Feasting and dancing, love and war. "The old, old story," said my uncle. "Yes, the sweet old story," said the artist. "Many an admired beauty has sat here." "And admired herself," said my uncle, who was a bachelor. The artist smiled. "True," said he, "and very likely some of those ladies come here now, for, of course, the place is haunted." "Ha, ha, ha," laughed my uncle. "You never saw a ghost, Sergeant?" asked the painter. "Not I," replied my uncle, "though, God knows, I must have made plenty of them in my time." A shadow fell upon his jolly face. He sighed. Mr. Marcher was silent for a few moments. He was busy sketching in the solid rotundity of my uncle's figure. Then he said, in a rather jibing manner, "I never believe in men who don't believe in ghosts. Do you think you'd not be scared if you saw one, Sergeant?" My uncle smiled. "I'd give a day's pay to see a real live ghost," he said, "especially the ghost of one of your pretty wenches here." "Come," said the artist, "do you mean it? Are you game enough to spend a night alone in this empty haunted house?" "Try me," said my uncle. "When?" asked the painter. "Tonight," said my uncle. "Done," said the painter. My uncle stroked his chin. "On conditions," he said, dryly. "Name them," said Marcher. "Some coal, some candles, some supper, and some whiskey," my uncle answered. The bargain was made. Good store of good things was laid in, and my uncle was duly locked up in the old house at a little after 11 o'clock that night. My Uncle Dick was an old campaigner. He hung the broadsword on the chair back, locked the door, made up a rousing fire, mixed a stiff bowl of punch, and helped himself generously to the rabbit pie and chutney. Being Sunday night, there were few passengers in the streets. The market was shut up. Very soon all sounds of traffic died away. My uncle conducted his attack upon the supper with soldierly energy and order. Now and again his quick ear caught some of those mysterious sounds that are heard in old houses at night, but they gave him no concern. There was a rattling in the next room, as of someone trying the door. "Rats," said my uncle, and sipped his grog. The stairs creaked, as though someone were stealthily ascending them. "It's a queer thing," said my uncle, "how these old timbers talk," and he helped himself to some more pie. A low sound, like a long-drawn sigh, came from the corridor. "Draughty window," quoth my uncle, and went on with his supper. When he had finished the rabbit pie, he put some more stiffening into his punch, filled his pipe, spread out the newspaper, snuffed the candle, and settled himself comfortably in his chair. At that moment a distant clock chimed the half-hour. My uncle lit his pipe and began to read. Soon the nocturnal noises ceased. A deep hush fell upon the old house, a silence that could be felt. The distant clock struck 12. My uncle poured out some more grog. "Good," said he. "If I'd been at home, I would have had nothing better for supper than bread and cheese and porter. I drink the ghost's health." My uncle winked at the portrait of the old earl which hung opposite him. The old earl returned the wink. Some men would have been alarmed. My uncle was not some men. He bowed to the old earl and said, "I couple your lordship's name with the toast," and took a long pull at the long glass. As he set the glass down, he heard a faint sound, like the click of a latch, on the upper corridor. He listened, but all was still. "It was the wind," said my uncle, and leaned over to relight his pipe at the candle. But just as the bowl touched the flame, he heard another sound, and sat quite still, his lips thrust out, his neck craned forward, his hands on his knees, and the pipe gripped tightly between his teeth. There was no doubt about it. My uncle could hear a light, cautious footstep, and the rustle of a dress upon the bedroom stairs. He sat motionless, holding his breath. The sound ceased. "Damn the candle," said my uncle. "What's the matter with you?" The flame had died almost away. The room grew dark. The portrait of the old earl was lost in gloomy shadow. The red glow of the fire, shining upon the cross pikes and rapiers on the wall, seemed to bathe their points in blood. My uncle laid down his pipe and turned his keen eyes toward the door. "Now," said he, "Mr. Marcher, let's see if your ghost has a key." The door swung slowly back. No key was put into the lock. Even the handle did not turn. My uncle raised his eyebrows in surprise. "The devil," said he. He could see the corridor and the head of the old oak staircase. He could see, also, the bottom steps of the bedroom flight, and on them stood an uncommonly graceful and pretty girl, dressed in a rich and quaint costume of white satin, and carrying an antique silver lamp. She looked at my uncle steadily for a moment, holding the lamp above her head, then smiled in a pleased way, walked lightly into the room, and closed the door. My uncle's candle went clean out. My uncle guessed at once that Mr. Marcher had played a trick upon him by persuading him that the house was uninhabited. "If I'd had that young smarty here," thought my uncle, "I'd give him a large slice of my mind, with no jam on it." He rose up from the table in confusion, and was about to apologize, but the lady set the lamp down on the mantelpiece and said, with sweet gravity, "I crave your pardon, sir. I fear I have detained you." "Not at all," said my uncle, stepping forward and bowing. "Doubtless you are surprised to see me here." "Indeed, no," said the lady. "I have expected you these many weary days, and, since you have tarried so long, am still more comforted at the sight of you. May I know your name?" "Dick Rogers, miss, at your service," said my uncle, bowing again, and wondering what the dickens it all meant. "I fear you have braved some sore perils in your coming hither, sir," said the lady. "Perils?" quoth my uncle, more perplexed than ever. "What perils?" The lady glanced at him in surprise. "Surely," said she, "you are a Puritan?" My uncle coughed, and cast a sidelong look at the punch bowl. Said he, "a Puritan? I can't exactly say that however." The lady recoiled a step. "But," she said, "you wear the dress. Your hair is cropped. You—" "Oh," said my uncle, smiling and looking down at his buff jerkin and long boots. "As for the uniform, I have newly joined the Ironsides. And as for my hair, why, short hair's the order in the army." The lady seemed relieved. She bent her head gracefully and said, "In good sooth, sir, I misdoubt you not. My eyes tell me you are a soldier, and my heart tells me that you are a friend. You come from Edward?" "Ah," thought my uncle, "the young painter's name is Edward, and this bonny lass is his sweetheart." Then, noticing the lady's look of keen anxiety, he hastened to say, "Yes." The lady leaned upon the back of an old oak chair on the left-hand side of the fire. "Pray you, sir, be seated," she said. My uncle bowed and sat down in a chair on the right-hand side of the fire. The lady fixed an eager look upon his face and said, "Tell me, soldier, is he well?" "As fit as a fiddle," quoth my Uncle Dick. The lady uttered a grateful sigh, and knelt down on the hearth almost at my uncle's feet. She shook the heavy golden curls from her shoulders, and looked up at him with a glad light in her pretty eyes, and a glad smile upon her pretty lips. There was a tiny dimple in her small round chin. Her throat was of a pearly whiteness. Her breast heaved gently under her satin bodice. A faint odor of bergamot rose from the ripples of her perfumed hair. "If a man is as old as he feels," thought my uncle, "this is my 21st birthday." "Tell me," said the lady in a soft, coaxing voice, "Captain d'Estournel, you know him well?" My uncle had never heard the captain's name before, and had not the slightest idea who the captain was. But he perceived the lady expected an affirmative answer, and, being a gallant man, he was prepared to die or lie rather than disappoint her. So he gave his mustache a twist and answered coolly, "Know him? Why, he was the captain of my company." The lady clasped her hands. "Where is he now?" she demanded eagerly. "Tell me, I pray you, of your kindness. I have borne suspense so long." "Certainly, miss," said my uncle, feeling anything but certain in his own mind. You see, the last time I saw the captain, of course, it's a good while since I left the regiment, but when you left it, he was well? He is not wounded, said the lady. The devil a wound. I beg your pardon, miss, said my uncle. The lady kept her eyes anxiously fixed on him. He is not a prisoner? She said. Prisoner? Bless your heart, no, said my uncle. The lady breathed a happy little sigh. God be praised for this great mercy, she said. You bring a message from him? A letter? Now, thought my uncle, I'd better spar for wind, or I shall be knocked out in one round. He adopted a bland, soothing manner, such as is common among physicians. All in good time, said he. You are over-anxious, miss. The lady's lip quivered, and tears sprang to her eyes, as she answered, plaintively, I am much moved. 'Twas a cruel fight, a fearful fight, so dire the loss. Her voice died away upon the word. My uncle studied for a moment. There must have been fighting in Afghanistan, he thought. Maybe her lover is out there, and, thinking it would be best to comfort this gentle creature at all hazards, he decided to lie with good grace. My dear young lady, he said, it's all right. I left the captain as sound as a bell. He sent his dear love to you, and he'd write as soon as he could write. The lady drooped her head. He might have sent a letter by your hand. It is so long since I had tidings of him, she said wistfully. To be sure, cried my uncle, in a loud, cheery voice, but all will be well. To his surprise, the lady started up in alarm. Hush, she said in a frightened whisper. Forget not in whose house you are. She stood a moment listening, then went to the secret panel. My uncle knew it was nailed up. He had seen the nails. The lady put one finger on it, and it slid noiselessly aside, disclosing a dark aperture. "'Tis well," said the lady in a low voice. "You know the way. You entered thence." My uncle gave his leg a furtive pinch to make sure that he was awake. If this is a put-up job, he thought, that girl is a devilish good actress. He was about to speak, but the lady, leaving the exit open, came back to the fire. "It seemeth strange and untoward," said she, "that Edward sent no sign, no token. You do not cozen me in kindness? 'Twere cruel kindness to deceive me, even to my own quietude and comfort. Better the bitter truth than hopes that flatter to deceive. Was thou at this battle, friend?" My uncle looked keenly at her troubled face. A doubt crossed his mind. The lady's speech was odd. Her dress was of a strange cut. My uncle resolved to come to the point. He rose from his chair and said, with calm politeness, "To prevent mistakes, miss, will you tell me your name?" She made a low curtsy and replied, "The Lady Beatrice Lestrange." My uncle felt more serious than ever. "May I ask, my lady," he said, bowing, "to what battle you refer?" The lady looked surprised. "To what battle should I refer," said she, "but to that great battle of the 2nd of July, wherein fell so many of England's best." Again the wind sighed on the landing. The stairs creaked, the lamp flickered, the old house trembled. My uncle drew himself up and lay his left hand on his sword hip. "And the name of that battle?" said he. The lady opened her blue eyes wide and answered in a clear, thrilling voice, "The Battle of Marston Moor." My uncle still felt doubtful. It might be all a trick. It might be that the painter's light words were true. "My Lady Lestrange," said my uncle steadily, "before I tell you any more about the captain, I should like to ask a favor." The lady looked at him and answered simply, "It is granted." My uncle did not know what fear meant, but his pulse beat rather more quickly than usual, and he drew his breath hard as he held out his hand and said, "Will you please to shake hands with a poor trooper?" The lady gave him a sweet, kind smile and laid her hand in his. Her hand was cold as ice. They mutually recoiled from each other, shuddering. There was a pause for a long minute. The two looked dreadfully into each other's eyes. My uncle declares that the silence was so profound that had a snowflake fallen upon the roof, he should have heard it. Then my uncle spoke. He said, "Lady Beatrice Lestrange, your lover is at rest. Rest thou also. He giveth his beloved sleep." As he spoke, the beautiful lady shivered violently from head to foot, turned deadly pale, drooped, and dwindled slowly into a wraith of pale mist, which floated on the air like the smoke from a rifle, drifted against the door, melted or passed through it, and was gone. My uncle stood stock still. He heard a sound, as of a woman sobbing, ascend the bedroom stairway and pass along the passage. He heard the sound die away into a long, sad wail. He heard the echo of that wail melt into the silence that could be felt. He heard his own heart beat. Then he shook himself mightily in his buff and belts, slapped his huge chest loudly, and gave his great mustache an angry twist. "I'll soon see the rights of this," said my uncle. He went to the table. His candle was burning brightly. He looked on the mantel shelf. The lamp was gone. He glanced round the room. The door was locked. The panel was nailed up. The fire burnt cheerfully in the ancient grate. The punch steamed invitingly upon the table. "I couldn't be dreaming," said my uncle, "but we'll soon see." He strode to the table, drank a glass of grog, and taking the candlestick in his left hand and the broadsword in his right, walked firmly up the stairs and made a tour of the bedrooms. They were empty. He went downstairs. The outer door was locked. He tried the window on the corridor. It was securely bolted. He returned to the studio. All was as he had left it. He relocked the door, brought up the table and punched to the fire, and was in the act of sheathing the old sword when his eye fell upon the forte of the blade, and he read the words, "Godfrey Charles Lestrange, from his loving sister Beatrice, in God's year 1640. It was a ghost, said my Uncle Dick, and he lit his pipe and mixed another bowl of punch. Of course, it may be said that the painter's talk, the old sword, the rats, the wind, and the punch, had all conspired together to excite my uncle's imagination, that he dreamed it, or fancied it, or invented it. But let any skeptic do as my uncle did. Let him go spend a night in the lady's boudoir at number 30 Market-place, Stockport, and he shall see what he shall see. For my part, I would scorn to do it. I have too much faith in the sagacity and truthfulness of my Uncle Dick. The end.